believed the killer was still at large.
It was a woman that worked in a convenience store that saw the children in the convenience store with an adult.
The store owner was certain she'd seen India and Cody.
She had remembered prior to that day hearing about the disappearance of the children, and that when the children came into the store, she remembered hearing the name India, and which drew her attention, and the female that was with the children actually called the girl Indiana, and the girl retorted, "It's India."
Who was the mystery woman with India?
It clearly seems like it was someone that was involved in the kidnapping of the children. I think that they didn't investigate the sightings or any of the other sightings because, again, their focus so early on was on Kevin.
The defense contested the prosecution's claim as to how the bodies had been moved.
Farmhands, unbeknownst to Kevin Neal, had been at that residence during the time that he claimed the children had disappeared, noted that there was no Maroon Bonneville out on the property.
The defense argued the theory about the car was weak.
There was no trace evidence at all in that car to substantiate that he drove the car.
If somebody wrapped up two dead bodies in this particular blanket with the seats on it, popped them in the back seat or in the trunk and hauled them to the cemetery, what trace evidence would be there?
If Neal had used the car to dispose of the bodies, it's likely there would have been evidence in the car.
You would have expected to have found trace evidence. There was nothing there.
Having considered the evidence, the defense speculated what may have happened to the children.
Kevin was in the house. He was doing dishes. The children were out playing. They were essentially snatched from the property. Kevin tried to search for the children. He called 911. They were taken to some unknown location and ultimately were dumped in the field when Kevin was incarcerated.
Kevin Neal did not kill these children.
And if so, who was the killer?
The fundamental structure of the American criminal justice system is the defense doesn't have to prove anything. We're like the defense on a football field. We have to stop the offense from scoring. Our job is not to solve the crime.
The defense were confident their experts had created reasonable doubt.
These individuals had been dead somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks before they were found.
Based on the entomological evidence in this case, is that the individuals could have been dead as late as the 1st of August.
2 teams of lawyers and 2 sets of experts had examined the evidence and reached very different conclusions. But ultimately, a jury would determine Kevin Neal's fate.
The whole case rose and fell on the question of the time of death. If they died after he got locked up, then he's not the murderer.
There was intense interest in the case.
The public's appetite for news on this case was insatiable.
It's our local O.J. Simpson case.
But how would it end? The prosecution and defense had analyzed the key evidence after Kevin Neal had been charged with the murder of his 2 stepchildren, India and Cody.
Kevin Neal was the one who had the motive. Kevin Neal was the one who had the opportunity. Kevin Neal had the background to be able to do something like this. It's without a doubt that Kevin Neal killed those kids.
Or had an innocent man been wrongly accused?
Kevin Neal did not kill these children. They fixed their focus, put their blinders on, and built a case to convict Kevin Neal. Facts inconsistent with that case were disregarded.
One of these facts related to Cody's shoes.
He's in prison. He can't also be out planting shoes on piles of trash. He can't do it.
Prosecutors argued there was another explanation.
We truly believe that the shoes must have been placed there around the time that Kevin was getting ready to leave to go to face his rape trial.
But the case rested on one fundamental issue.
The whole case rose and fell on the question of the time of death.
If we couldn't prove that the children had died before July 23rd, then Kevin Neal could not be held responsible for their deaths.
It was time for the complex forensic evidence to be presented in court.
My final conclusions were a fairly tight range of July 9th to July 14th for death to have occurred.
In my opinion, the evidence does not substantiate a post-mortem period that would be as precise as the 9th to the 14th of July. There's just too much biological variability to allow that sort of inference to be made.
The jury faced a challenging decision.
There were no witnesses to the murder. When we found the children, they were found in an unexplained set of circumstances.
The biggest problem we knew as the defense we faced from the get-go was anybody seated on that jury would want to make somebody pay, no matter the evidence.
The trial began in May 2000.
I think the biggest thing that we had going for us was the timeline and the lack of any direct evidence. It was obviously a very circumstantial case from the state's perspective.
As a prosecutor, I often view circumstantial evidence as better evidence than direct evidence. Circumstantial evidence takes pieces of the puzzle, and from pieces of the puzzle you can make reasonable inferences. And it's kind of like hooking one chain link to another chain link. And before you know it, altogether that chain is pretty strong.
Media interest in the case was intense.
The public's appetite for news on this case was insatiable. They couldn't get enough.
It's our local O.J. Simpson case. I mean, this case was covered hard, repeatedly, daily.
The prosecution and defense each presented strong arguments for their case.
It is both sides trying to sell the jurors on their theory of what happened. It's always a past event. They weren't there, we weren't there. You had to teach them your theory is worth believing, and you got to be a bit of a preacher.
After 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict.
When they went out to deliberate, as much damage as we thought we had done to the government's witnesses, their case, their theory, there was always the foreboding worry that with 2 dead children, we were in trouble.
Once the jurors retired to deliberate, we were pretty tensed up about what they might decide. I think all of us were surprised, though, at how quickly they came back.
And the verdict? Guilty on 2 counts of aggravated murder.
I didn't do this. My conscience is clear.
The defense was stunned.
Kevin is not guilty. These children died after Kevin got locked up, proven by the science of bugs, the science of the smell of death.
I think Kevin's record hurt our case. The fact that he had been incarcerated for a prior felony, the bullseye was on him.
But for the prosecution, justice had prevailed.
From the moment that the guilty verdict was read by the judge, I felt that justice was served in this case, that we had our man and that he would never hurt again.
We've spoken for the children, and that's what we as investigators do, is we work to protect people and hold people accountable.
Having considered the forensic evidence from the prosecution and defense, a jury had found Kevin Neal guilty of the murder of India and Cody. He is now serving a life sentence.
Another new episode of Forensic Justice here on ID at the same time tomorrow. Coming up, telephone records prove vital in the search for the murderer. Stay with us for the FBI Files.